thank you very much for having me here. You're missing a fantastic sunset. Maybe I should go stand back there. I think I will. So Peter Drucker tells a story about a man who goes to check on the progress of the building of a church in medieval times in Europe. And he goes to another man who is doing backbreaking work. He's breaking rocks. And he says, "What are you doing?" And the man says, "I'm breaking rocks to build a church. It's terrible work. I don't like it at all, but it's the only way I can earn a living." He goes to the next man. Isn't that sunset amazing? Wow. I'm never going back to Florida. He goes to the next man, and he says, "What are you doing?" And the man says, "I'm breaking rocks to build a wall. And this wall will take at least 20 years to build, and I probably will not live the 20 years, but I'm interested in the wall, and that's what I'm doing, and that's how I support my family." He goes to the third man, and he says, "What are you doing?" And the man says, "I'm breaking rocks to build the most beautiful cathedral that will ever stand on the continent of Europe." 10 years later, the man comes back. He looks for the first gentleman who was breaking rocks. He's died. He went to the second man. He said, "What are you doing?" "I'm still breaking rocks to build the wall. I don't like it, but there will be a wall here by the time I'm done." He looks for the third man. He said, and there was wind in the air. It's just dramatic. Well, the third man was there no longer because he became an architect and he was designing a room that would be even bigger and better than this one. So the reason that Peter Drucker told that story was that we are all breaking rocks. And we're all building a wall, or we're all building a cathedral. So we all have to think for yourself, for your children, for your clients, what am I doing, why am I doing it, and am I here to build a cathedral? So if I'm here to build a cathedral, what part of my professional satisfaction, what part of my professional results are involved with building a cathedral? And for me, one of those things is to not trip on a light and to do a fantastic job for my clients and to do a fantastic job for my community. And if I'm going to do a fantastic job for my clients and a fantastic job for my community, I have to maneuver through a minefield of tax law and business law called the tax law of charitable planning. And it is not a friendly area for the uninitiated, because when you read about it, it keeps telling you you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, there's all these rules, and it doesn't get around all the time to telling you what you can do. So what I want to do in the next 53 minutes, which for most of you is at least 1 minute hour, is to tell you some of the things you can do in your charitable planning. And I want to leave 5 or 10 minutes, and if anyone has any stories you'd like to tell, or anyone would like to share something that I'm not going to get to, I'll appreciate that, because I may not have enough material. By the way, the book that I brought, I didn't actually bring it because it didn't get here. I donated this book to a 501c3 organization. And the reason I did it was I called the law professors at Stetson Law School in St. Petersburg, and I said, your students have to do 40 hours of pro bono work, right? Right. Can they write for a 501c3 book, a book on charity? Well, sure, if you put in a 501c3 organization. So I donated the book to a 501c3 organization. And now the royalties that come in from Weinberg Information Services on the sale of the book are tax-free. Because royalties that come into a 501c3 organization are tax-free. So now you know that, and you can go home and you learn a lot of interesting things. If you know any law students that would like to write on this book, they can help improve the literature in this area. And if you work in anything, you can help improve the literature in this area. I also want to mention that I've been working with Jerry Hash, Jonathan Blockmacher, and Bob Keebler on this estate view software that you see on the second page of your handout. It's absolutely free until April 1st. And if you've attended this event, it's absolutely free for 6 months. Just send me an email, and you can run the numbers on charitable planning well beyond what you're able to do on your normal calculators. So go play with this, because it's not all that intimidating when you learn how to run the numbers. So in this charitable area, I want you to think while building the cathedral about the conversations that you're having with your clients. Now, a lot of you are philanthropical professionals, so you know how to go about listening carefully to the client, finding out what their passions and concerns are, and designing a program that fits them well. But for the rest of us, who are not primarily philanthropical, we may fumble the ball quite a bit. So I want to just give you a few ideas about this. But the most important idea is that it's not necessarily easy, and there's no one formula for helping your clients understand the incredible benefits that they can receive from being philanthropic. There are good books written. One of the good books is by a PhD professor, and he did a study on people's health and mental well-being and financial well-being if they are generous to charity. And what he found is that people who are successful do better financially from a health standpoint and in relationships if they are generous to charity. Now, who knows whether that's the chicken or the egg, but the name of the book is Why Good Things Happen to Good People. Now, this is not Rabbi Kushner, who wrote a book about why bad things happen to good people, but this is a good book, and I buy them 20 at a time, and I have them on the conference room table, or close to the conference room table, to help start that conversation. Another thing I want you to know is when you're doing estate planning for a client, you will often say, or I will often say, is there anything that you would like to do for charity? And the answer is a quiet no. My children will handle it. That's a polite way to say it. And that may be the answer that you get when the client is 30. And that may be the answer you get when the client is 40. And that may be the answer you get when the client is 50. But there can be a very big change on retirement, on reaching a high level of wealth, on losing a child or a grandchild to a disease. So you need to keep asking the question, because somebody who wasn't charitable 10 years ago can become very charitable without notice. You just have to keep politely asking the question. And why do people give? And this is important too, because a lot of this gifting comes from married couples. And one member of the married couple may be very excited about gifting because they like to do a nice thing for the community, or they like to have the tax savings. Another member of this married couple may need the recognition, and they may want to have events. That may be their big turn on. So you have to analyze both members of the family, both of the decision makers, in order to make this happen. And quite commonly, or quite candidly, sometimes one family member needs to be a little bit confused before they're willing to make the deviation. And that's why the complexity of the tax law can be helpful. In the bigger area where we see the tax law wag the dog, is in liquidity planning. Over and over again, what we see is somebody is going to sell a business and get a significant windfall from the sale. And when they sell the business and they get the significant windfall, they're going to pay a huge amount of income taxes. So what you can do in that situation is transfer a significant portion of what they're going to sell into a charitable remainder unit trust. And then the charitable remainder unit trust makes the sale. And when the charitable remainder unit trust makes the sale, there is no income tax paid by the charitable remainder unit trust. And then the charitable remainder unit trust can pay them over time. And you can run the numbers very easily on the software and find that if you do a 20-year charitable remainder unit trust, they will receive approximately 11.2% of the value of what's in that unit trust every year for 20 years, which means they're going to get most of what's in that unit trust out of that unit trust. And they're going to defer the tax and pay that tax over the 20-year period. And that's very appealing to them because they know that the earnings in that charitable remainder unit trust are going to be higher because 30% of it is not going to Uncle Sam at the time of the transaction. And only 10% of the actuarially calculated value of this charitable remainder unit trust is going to go to charity after 20 years, and the charity may be their family foundation, which they can form at the end of the 19th year, just before it matures, and then once it's in the family foundation, they can completely control it. So that is very, very appealing to them. And not only that, but if they put a $10 million asset into that charitable remainder unit trust, they will get a $1 million tax deduction. And at the 37% bracket, that will save them $370,000 of income taxes, which can pay your professional fees for setting this up. So that's the simple charitable remainder unit trust. Oh, and they can be the trustee of the trust and receive a trustee fee. They can control it completely because they want to have control, and they can tell everyone that they set it up. Under the recent court case, though, they really need to get this set up and get it funded well before they almost inked their deal. They can get this done at the letter of intent stage, but not a week before they sign the sale agreement. And that's a shame. And I think the tax court got that wrong, by the way. But that's what the tax court came up with, and that's what we're stuck with. So they've got to do it sooner rather than later. But it gets better than this because they can do a flip nimcroft. Now that's not a dog when you flip, or it's not a dolphin, but it can be just as friendly and just as popular as a dog or a dolphin. Because with the flip nimcroft, they can control when they get their payments, and their payments can still be quite large. So when you run the numbers on a flip nimcroft, you could have them get no payments for the first 5 to 8 years. No payments at all. And what happens is the payments build up inside the trust. So instead of getting 11% of what's left after each payment, they're getting 11% a year credited to them as the trust grows in value. It's a greater amount. And then in year 6 or 7, you can flip the switch. They get all that has built up, and then it becomes a regular NIM. And you can run those numbers on the state view if you want, or anywhere else, and when you run those numbers, the clients will actually understand them if they're intelligent enough to operate a good business and understand financial statements. They can understand that they will completely control the flip NIM. Now, the way the flip NIM works is that the charitable remainder unit trust, only has to pay out its income. So you say, Alan, how are you going to control the income? How are you going to have no income for the first 5 or 6 years, and then a lot of income when they flip in year 6? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Delaware limited liability company and the Delaware Principal and Income Act. Alaska also has a good Principal and Income Act, which says that income is what you get out of the LLC whenever you decide to get it. So you have the flip NIM, you receive a LLC, the LLC has this asset, and then the LLC holds the asset. The LLC generates income, but it's not called income until the LLC distributes it to the NIM. And that is the flip NIM. So only 10% goes to charity, but significant income tax deferral. But I can even make it better than that. I can make it better than that. Let's say that I have a $10 million asset and I put it in a flip NIM, and I take back a unit trust interest that you and I know is worth $9 million, because 10% is going to go to charity. And I say, I would like to donate that $9 million interest to a dynasty trust for my children and grandchildren in exchange for a promissory note. And I hire a valuation firm. Are there any valuation firms here today? Who is a valuation person? Who here will pay me $9 million for my flip NIM unit trust interest? None of you will. None of you will. So I sell that flip NIM interest worth $9 million to the Dynasty Trust in exchange for a $6 million note. In exchange for a $6 million note, and now $3 million of that value is out of my estate for federal estate tax purposes. So that's one way to do it. Now another way to do it that's very popular is that I will instead, I'll start the Dynasty Trust. So I set up an irrevocable grantor trust. It's out of my estate for estate tax purposes, and everyone in this room, you have clients that have these irrevocable trusts. Now, I will sell the stock of the company or the asset that's in play to this trust for a note. So the trust owes me $10 million, and it owns this $10 million asset. The trustee of this trust can make the donation to the Charitable Remainder Unit Trust. Make sure that your Dynasty Trust documents allow donations to Charitable Remainder Unit Trust. The Dynasty Trust makes the donation to the Charitable Remainder Unit Trust, gets back the Unit Trust interest. The tax deduction comes to my client if they want the income tax deduction. But there's another alternative. If they don't want the income tax deduction, then I can allow them, after the Charitable Remainder Unit Trust has its liquidity event, to borrow money from the Charitable Remainder Unit Trust in exchange for a promissory note owed by the family, and the family can deduct the interest paid to the Charitable Remainder Unit Trust, which will not have to pay income tax on the interest received until the distributions take place. So what's common in the big transaction world, just so you know it's out there, is the client with the $10 million asset sells it to the Dynasty Trust. The Dynasty Trust puts the asset into the flip NIMPRUT, and the flip NIMPRUT can benefit any 501c3 charity and any cemetery association. And because the cemetery association possibility is there, there's no income tax deduction. There's no gift tax deduction because the Dynasty Trust doesn't make a gift. And therefore, the self-dealing rules don't apply. And if the self-dealing rules don't apply, now the family can do transactions with the flip NIMPRUT. There were 2 private letter rulings explicitly allowing that, and it comes right out of the Internal Revenue Code. Now the IRS will no longer rule on it. So that's some of the things that you can do when your very best client sells their assets. Now, they may say, well, it's an S corporation selling the assets, and I can't do this with an S corporation. Well, the S corporation can form a flip NIMPRUT, and now the unit trust payments are coming up to the S corporation, and then the flip NIMPRUT sells the assets. So there's ways to get these things done. It's just a matter of finding out how they're going to work. With a married couple, you can also run the numbers for a lifetime joint and survivor NIMPRUT. So Marcia and I formed a NIMPRUT. We paid about $50,000 for some bank stock, and suddenly it was worth $400,000. And we put it in a life NIMPRUT. Our average age is 64, and that NIMPRUT is going to pay joint and survivor 8% a year, and that's going to spread out the capital gain that would have come from the bank stock. It was a silly little thing. I mean, it wasn't that little, but for us it was worthwhile to do that after we spoke to our financial plan. So again, these charitable, because if and when I ever retire, which I hope I never do, then my tax rate will go down, and then I can flip it. Any questions so far? Okay. Another thing, and I'm going to get to other things, but I'm talking first about our very best clients. The zero estate tax plan. My favorite professor in law school, the first day of the estate tax class, Professor Doug Miller, he said, the estate tax is a voluntary tax. The vast majority of the estate tax that was paid by accident or by reason of inattention. And I often think about these families, it's survival of the fittest. Grandpa made a fortune, the children didn't blow it totally, and then the grandchildren blew it completely. It's survival of the fittest. But there's 2 techniques that can work very well for a wealthy family to have a zero estate tax. The first one is the Charitable Lead Annuity Trust, and the second one is the transfer to charity in exchange for an administrative note. Everybody knows the administrative note exception, right? So let me just mention these. So I'm gonna die and leave $100 million worth of assets. 27 million of that is going to pass estate tax free. And maybe that's enough for my children. Maybe I've already got enough of Dynasty Trust for my children, but I'm concerned about the other $73 million of assets that are going to be subject to federal estate tax. Well, if I leave the whole $73 million worth of assets, by the way, did somebody just activate your call horn? Is that anybody's call? Okay. If I leave the whole $73 million worth of assets to my children, I'm going to pay a 40% estate tax. That's going to be about $29 million of estate tax. So what I can do instead is I can leave those assets to a charitable lead annuity trust, most commonly a 20 or 25-year charitable lead annuity trust, and on my death there will be no estate tax whatsoever, there will be 20 or 25 years of payments to charity, and then at the end of the 25th year or the 20th year, whatever's left in the charitable remainder unit trust can be held for my descendants. And the zeroed out charitable lead annuity trust is going to be very popular if the Democrats do well in the next election, because it's going to be partially eliminated. The Biden Green Book says that you're not going to be able to zero out a class anymore, and you're not going to be able to do sharp-term class. So they're going to become very popular, because if you want to make something popular, just point out that it may not be here anymore. So now, if I run the numbers on a charitable lead annuity trust, and it pays an equal annual payment to charity, it earns about 7.5% on average, and today's 75-20 rate is about 5%. That extra 2.5% rate of return, called the hurdle rate, is going to give my children in 20-25 years about 25% of the assets. 75% are going to go to charity, which could be this beautiful hospital or the client's private foundation or public foundation, operating foundation. We'll get to talk about that. Okay? But if I do a class that increases, where the payments increase by 20% a year, and when you run the numbers, then you see that the children get about 35%, charity gets 65%. But then if I fund the class with discounted LLC interest, and I take about a 29% discount, now half goes to the charity in present value numbers, and half goes to my family. Now, what we do for a lot of our clients is I explain to them the Warren Buffett rule, which I think is nobody needs more than 10 million. And I ask the client, what do you think each of your children need before you will ruin their lives by leaving them too much? And then the client says 20 million, 30 million, 40 million, whatever that is. And then I said, well, how about if everything over that goes to a charitable lead annuity trust, which will pay to your private foundation, and there'll still be a lot left over for your children. And then quite often the clients say yes, or there's another way to do it. And that is, I leave 1/3 to the trust for my son, 1/3 to the trust for my daughter, 1/3 to the trust for my other daughter, and the trustee of each of those trusts can either accept it or disclaim it in whole or in part to a client. And if the son's trustee disclaims it to the class, then the son's share will not be subject to federal estate tax. And it will go to a separate foundation that the trustee will form, that coincidentally the son will run. So then each child can choose, after mom and dad die, whether they want part of this to go to the charitable lead annuity trust or not. But then I explain to the client, if you wait until you die, there's no income tax benefit. Would you like to do part of this now? Because if you put $10 million in the charitable lead annuity trust, or $1 million, you're going to get a tax deduction of the whole amount, even though more than half of it, we hope, will be back in your children's hands in present value numbers in the next 20 years. But you've got to live the whole 20 years in order for it to work. So maybe we'll buy some life insurance also to hedge the bets. So that's the charitable lead annuity trust. And when you say to clients, do you want to pay state taxes? No, I don't. Do you mind benefiting charity? I don't mind benefiting charity. Okay, that's the charitable lead annuity trust. Any questions or comments on the charitable lead annuity trust? Okay, you're all sleeping. I get it. The sun's down. Does anyone want another drink? So I know you all will. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is the administrative note. So the administrative note exception to the self-dealing rules sounds really complicated, but it's actually pretty darn simple. And here's the way it works. When I die, I can leave significant assets to a charity, either a public charity or a private charity, and I can allow my children, or a dynasty trust for my children, or the credit shelter trust that opens when I die and is funded with $13,610,000, that entity, not subject to estate tax, can buy the assets that are going to the foundation. So here's my example. I have a $50 million company that shoots off $8 million a year of income. I die. If that company is subject to estate tax, my children have to pay a $20 million estate tax. So instead, when I die, that $50 million company goes to a foundation, a charitable foundation. The children have the option of buying the company for a 20-year, 4% note. So they say, you know, let's buy the company, we'll owe the company, and then we'll owe the foundation $50 million at 4%. So $50 million at 4% is $2 million a year. The company pays them $8 million a year. The positive cash flow from the arrangement is they get $8 million from the company. They pay $2 million of interest to the foundation. They get a $2 million tax deduction. The foundation does not pay income tax on that. So they have a $6 million net income. And mom and dad's foundation get $2 million a year. That's not a bad gig, is it? But it even gets better. How much would you pay me for a 25-year interest-only note that's only paying 4% with long-term applicable federal aid? You would probably pay me $35 million, right? At most, maybe 30, maybe 25. Well, if the charity that is owed the note is a public charity, then the children can enter into a transaction and prepay the note at a discount. So they can actually give that charity $25 or $30 million and have the company. That's a pretty good deal. Would you rather give Uncle Sam $20 million, or would you rather have $30 million in Mom and Dad's foundation? Now you ask me, your question, of course, is how do you make Mom and Dad's foundation a public charity? And this comes up, and this is very important. When your clients want to do heavy lifting into a family-controlled foundation, and they also want to be able to enter into arm's-length transactions with that foundation, and they don't want to be subject to the minimum payment benefit rules that apply to private foundations. So the traditional answer is, sorry, Marion Floyd, because you're setting up your own foundation. That was it. Thank you, Roger Waters. So, what do I have to do so that Marion Floyd can enter into transactions with their family foundation, and also not have to make annual minimum distributions of 4.25% of the value? And the answer is, I can make it a school, A school is a public charity. So I live in Tampa, Florida. The Tampa Times is owned by the Pulitzer Foundation. Mr. Pulitzer died in the 1960s, and he willed the then St. Petersburg Times to the Pulitzer Foundation, which has a journalism school in St. Petersburg, Florida. So when the Tampa Times used to be profitable, there was no income tax on it, and it's basically held for the goodness of the community and the employees, which makes it a great newspaper. A karate school. All you need is a physical school that can be rented. You need a faculty, which could be one karate teacher. You need students to go to the school, and you need a curriculum, which is we teach karate. So that is one way to do it. Another way to do it is your client can form a medical research organization, which simply does medical research in cooperation with a hospital. Or your client can form a hospital, and by definition of the Internal Revenue Code, a hospital can just be a clinic where poor people can go, and it's okay if it makes money. It's okay if it's profitable, as long as it's a clinic and it satisfies a lot of non-discrimination type of rules. So I have a handful of clients, pretty wealthy by my standards, and what they're going to do on their death is have their restaurants, their retail stores, their rental properties owned by a private foundation that will operate schools that will teach people the trades that made my clients wealthy, and so that they will not be subject to federal estate tax. So that is the administrative note exception. Now, let's see how we're doing for time. Okay, I have 20 minutes, which is most of it. So now let's talk about, any questions so far? Okay. By the way, this book, if you want a PDF copy, just send me an email. I'll send it to you. So let's mention some other planning techniques that are just not often used. One thing is, don't dump everything into the charity. If you do have a client that wants to leave everything to charity, leave the first $13,610,000 that passes estate tax-free into an irrevocable trust that will benefit charity and a few other people who are worthy, so that trust will not be subject to all these gosh darn charitable rules. And that trust can distribute all of its income for charitable purposes under Section 642C of the Internal Revenue Code. And whenever you draft an irrevocable trust for a person or a family, please ask them, do you want the trustee to be able to make distributions to charity? Because if I don't authorize it in the trust document, I can't get the tax deduction for you for income tax purposes when you make the distribution. And secondly, if you do want to authorize charitable distributions, do you want to put a limit on it? And some clients do want to put a limit on it. They don't want a beneficiary to get hoodwinked by an overly aggressive charitable organization. Also, so the client or they're making limits on what kinds of charitable organizations they are, but it's a good thing to make sure that you ask the question. Now, if you have a complex trust that doesn't authorize specifically charitable distributions, and you want to still get the deduction, you have that irrevocable trust, push the assets down into an entity taxed as a partnership, have that partnership entity then make the distribution, and then the charitable deduction will come up to that irrevocable trust. Now, another use of the irrevocable trust is when your client comes to you and says, I really want to donate more, but I can only donate 50% of my adjusted gross income, and I would donate more if I could donate a higher percentage of my gross income. Well, if you could put a high income asset into an irrevocable complex trust, then that high income asset, all the income from that asset goes into this irrevocable trust, and then the trustee can decide what distributions to make among family members of charity, and 100% of the income can go to the charitable organizations, and you won't be subject to that 50% of adjusted gross income limitation. There's an exception, though, under the 2017 Act, where S corporation income going into a complex trust is still subject to that 50% limitation. And a lot of people don't know that, so you can keep it in mind. We have elections coming up, and you're going to have clients that would like to donate a lot of money to political campaigns and political causes. So just know that a Section 501c4 social welfare organization will allow, that code section does not give you a charitable deduction, but if I have $1 million worth of stock that I paid $100,000 for, I can put that into a 501c4 organization. It can sell that stock for $1 million, it pays no income tax, and then it can donate up to 40% of its assets to political campaigns and PAC groups, and then spend the other 60% on publicizing any sort of politically sensitive issue, for immigration against immigration, for abortion against abortion, and that would be a tax-efficient way to fund political contributions. Any questions on 501c4s? There's been multi-billion-dollar contributions to 501c4s on both sides of the aisle in the last 4 years, including the entire Patagonia company was donated in that fashion. Some clients would like the publicity and the feeling of having a family foundation in their name, but they don't want the complexity of a family foundation. For example, a client came to me and said, I have promised my alma mater $1 million, and I'm about to get married. And my new spouse doesn't really think much about my $1 million pledge. And I'm afraid that that new spouse, sometime over my lifetime, will reverse that pledge. But I don't want to set up a 501c3, and I don't want to have to deal with giving it away right now. So we put it in an irrevocable trust for the sole benefit of he and his children and his alma mater. And it's up to the trustee to decide if and when to make a distribution and who that distribution will be to. And it is an incomplete gift trust for income tax purposes. So for income tax purposes, it's like he never gave it away. He has the right to veto distributions. He has the right to exercise a power of appointment for the benefit of his children. But the school still gave him recognition for the pledge, and there's nothing that his spouse or other people can do in the future to undo it. And then there's a provision that says that if he releases his powers, it becomes a 501c3 charitable organization. Most of the 501c3 charitable organizations that we establish are irrevocable trusts. And I prefer the irrevocable trust because, number one, it exists from the time that it's signed. I don't have to file a state charter, and I don't have to have 3 directors, the way Florida law requires me to have 3 directors. With a trust, the client can simply be the trustee. So I prefer those trusts. All right, for some of the day-to-day distribution planning for charity, you know, over and over again, you see somebody dies and 100,000, 50,000, 200,000, 500,000 is going to charity when they die. Well, it would have been a lot better if that amount went directly from an IRA or a pension account to the charity. So let's just remember that. And, you know, if I leave $500,000 to the church and my children get $500,000 of IRA distributions that they have to pay income taxes on, that doesn't make any sense at all. Now, if my IRA is payable to my trust, and my trust leaves $500,000 to the church, it's going to take some calisthenics to make that $500,000 from the IRA taxable to the church. It may take a court reformation. It may take fiscal year balancing. So it would be better to say that my IRA is payable to the church subtrust under my revocable trust, and then the church subtrust under my revocable trust says that the first $500,000 received from the IRA will go to the church, reduced by whatever I might give the church exceeding $20,000 a year. But just think about that. Another thing, a lot of our clients have variable annuity contracts. Annuity contracts that they bought believing that they were indexed annuities, they were going to give them this guaranteed return. I'm not encouraging that. I don't necessarily like these products, but there's a lot of income stored in it. So clients got $1 million variable annuity with $300,000 of income in it. So that $300,000, the variable annuity could be made payable to the charity or to a special subtrust under your client's revocable trust or under their will that then goes to the charity. So that first $300,000 that comes out goes to the charity, and the charity doesn't have to pay income tax on it. Now, maybe your client has a relatively small estate and they want to leave $500,000 to the hospital, and they have $1.5 million estate. And they have a very wealthy son or a very wealthy daughter in a high tax bracket. So what do? They could leave the $500,000 to the child and provide in their document, I'm leaving my daughter, Sandy, $500,000 for the museum. I request that Sandy either explain this disposition, if she must understand. Okay, so I leave my daughter Sandy $500,000. I request that my daughter Sandy either explain this disposition, in which event it will go to the museum, or I invite my daughter to accept the disposition.
All here. Rapid response. All here. Rapid response. All here.
You know, I'm going to say that it's really good to know that we're in a hospital setting where somebody's life may have just been saved, and the announcement goes out, and everyone in that hospital is right in alignment to save that life. A lot of things just happened. I don't know what they were. But I'm going to go back to Sam. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate what hospitals do. They save lives, and they care about people. So I leave $500,000 to my daughter Sandy. She can disclaim it to the museum, or she can accept it and donate it to the museum and get the income tax deduction for that. So that would be a very tax-efficient way. Another tax-efficient way is I leave 1/3 of my assets plus $500,000 to an irrevocable trust for my daughter Sandy, and the first $500,000 of income earned by that trust will go to the museum. That turns out to be the best alternative, because if Sandy disclaims it, she doesn't get the income tax deduction. If Sandy gets it and gives it to the museum, she may not need that much of the income tax deduction, Or her spouse may talk her out of it. But if it goes to the irrevocable trust and it has to go to the first $500,000 of income, has to go to the museum, then that is probably going to be the very best alternative. So when you have a situation where a client's making a simple disposition to the charity, you want to think about that. The other thing you want to think about, and this goes to the real estate side of things. You know, people, as you know, people can be a little bit peculiar about their real estate. They don't want to let go of their real estate. So what you can do is you can say, well, if your real estate pays you an income of about 6% a year, let's put that real estate in a charitable remainder trust that will pay you 6% a year for the next 9 years, and then after 9 years, it will go to charity. So that's one way, and that can fit like a glove for a lot of clients. You get a client in their 70s, and they think that those numbers work well. The other thing you can do with a building is if they took straight line depreciation on the building. So here's the building, it's worth $1 million, you've already depreciated it. If you sell it, you're going to pay $370, but you're going to pay a lot of income tax. Let's donate the building to your foundation. Get a $370,000 deduction right now. Your children can continue to manage the building, and then they're going to take the rent income and they're going to actively manage the foundation by awarding scholarships or educational grants. So I have 2 clients who did this, 2 separate clients who did it. They're both very happy. We transferred the property to a private foundation. But what you do is you make it a private operating foundation. A private foundation is where you can only deduct 20% of adjusted gross income on the donation. A private operating foundation gets a 50% of adjusted gross income limitation. And the only difference is a private operating foundation has to operate. And operating a foundation, it has to be at some degree of activity. And that's where I come back to you with the beginning of my talk, is can you involve your clients in an activity that will give them satisfaction? And a lot of some of my retired clients like to meet with young people and like to talk to them about their careers and like to write them checks for scholarships and like to mentor them. So one of my clients does this with a music program, and one of my clients does this with a hospital. And it's his own foundation, but he meets with the hospital every 2 months. He meets with employees of the hospital who want to further their medical education and their medical careers. He awards the scholarship, he mentors them, and he gives them awards when they graduate. And that makes it a private operating foundation. Any questions on the private operating foundation? Okay, so now I want to go through my PowerPoint. What have I left off? Have any of you seen anything that I've left off? So I've done the charitable remainder unit trust. I've done the charitable remainder and charitable lead annuity trust. If the client doesn't want to risk being paid every year from a charitable remainder trust based on a percentage of the value of the charitable remainder trust, then they can do a charitable remainder annuity trust where they get a fixed amount each year, and then if things go bad in the economy, they still get their payment. Okay, let's talk about remainder interest. Very easy to run the numbers, and it does make sense for some clients. So I really want to help the music school or the hospital, and I love my home. My home's worth $1 million, so I can donate the remainder interest in my home to the charitable organization. And what's really good about that is I get an immediate tax deduction. So I donate the remainder interest in my home. It's worth $500,000 times 40%. That's a $200,000 check that the IRS has given me for my promise. But I get to live in the home, and my son-in-law and daughter-in-law are never going to get that home away from me, because I only own the life estate now. So it saves the home from creditors. And then later, what we have found is over time, the client has affection for the charity, and later will donate the life estate while they're still living to get another charitable deduction. The same thing applies for farms. And then you also have, so we cover that. The other thing you have, which maybe is a teaser, not a lot of people are using it, but you did have, under the newer Secure Act, the ability to move $50,000 from your IRA into a charitable remainder unit trust. So I could take my $50,000 minimum distribution that I have to take and go to a charitable remainder unit trust, which would then come out over 20 years. So that could be popular, but $50,000 is not much. But a married couple could do it with $100,000 if they do it at the same time. So I know some charities always do charitable remainder trust for free, so that at least that might be a teaser. And then the final thing, which you can run the numbers, if you run the numbers for people, they will appreciate it, and that is the required minimum distribution rule. So anytime I get a client with an IRA worth more than $2 million, for the first meeting, it takes a secretary all of 12 minutes to run a spreadsheet that says you're 65 now, when you're 74 or whatever year it is, your IRA at 7.5% rate of return is going to be worth $4.2 million. And if it continues to grow and you take your minimum distributions, here's all the income tax you're going to pay. And by the way, it never runs out. It never runs out. It's still a lot. Even at age 100, you only take out 14%. So, but here's what happens if you leave the required minimum distribution amount of up to $105,000 a year to charity. And here's the income tax savings you will have if you share your IRA with charity, making qualified charitable distributions. And I just want to tell you that when the clients see it on a spreadsheet and they see the column that says income tax savings, they're just much more likely to go ahead and say, yeah, I like the idea. And then you can click on that spreadsheet the way the software works. You can click that spreadsheet. How about $20,000 a year? How about $30,000 a year? How about $40,000 a year? What does that look like? And give them that understanding that their wealth is abundant. It's not a scarcity model. It's an abundance model. When you show a 7% rate of return on an IRA to a 73-year-old, it is just a gift that keeps giving that they can share. So I'm going to be here afterwards if you have any questions, and I really appreciate the attention you've given me and the attention you give to your clients, the attention that you give to your community. And the final thing I just want to say is, clients want to do what you do. My mother used to run a little jewelry shop. And they would just always buy what she wore. So please wear charitable activities for your clients. Be involved with charitable activities. Talk about the satisfaction that you and others have gotten from charitable activities. Because quite honestly, they just don't know unless you tell them. Thank you very much.